Welcome back. Well, today I want to address what I call gun myth number one. The reason I call it gun myth number one is because I think it's probably the most often stated comment that I see about wooden stocks, and that is that they are not as reliable as other materials for stocks. And statements to that effect, or that one of the cliches is that, you know, they will tend to move after repeated firing, or they will move because they go from one climate to another, and they are, you know, relatively unstable. That's a term that you'll very often hear about wooden stocks. Well, first of all, you know, I'm convinced that gun writers must, first of all, you know, attend some sort of a course or, you know, take a class where they pass a test on certain cliches in the gun industry. And this cliche, I call it a cliche because it really is. It's a stupid remark that to say that wooden gun stocks are, you know, inaccurate or unstable, or they tend to move, or they're prone to weather changes, and all these statements that you've heard and you've read about. And unfortunately, what becomes very true is that when something like that is pronounced enough by enough people in print, it becomes considered to be valid, that is true, and it's not at all. Sometime around, I would say probably about 30 or 40 years ago, in my recollection, I started to see a little bit of print about the so-called instability of gun stocks, and that their so-called tendency to move or to curl or to wander or do this, you know, change their point of impact, you know, because of changes of weather and things like that. I saw that repeated very, very frequently, and I think it has basically churned up more and more and more through the years, because as one gun writer pronounces it, it becomes true to the next gun writer and so forth, and everybody wants to parrot the same thing. What I find rather hysterical is that, you know, gun writer so-and-so will make these pronouncements about how unstable a gun stock is and everything, and then the next time you see a picture of him in Zimbabwe or something in front of a gazelle, he's got his wood-stocked rifle propped against his game. You know, they don't practice what they write. They love wood for the same reason that anybody loves wood, because it's pretty to look at. Every one of them is a different piece of wood. They can't be replicated. These are like snowflakes. Every piece of walnut is different. And that's by and large, throughout the world, walnut is, in its various species, walnut is the favored wood for gun stocks, whether it's European walnut, Turkish walnut, or here in the United States, overwhelmingly black walnut. Now there are other very, I would say, popular gun stock woods through the years. There's maple. Maple is nothing new. Maple was used in old flintlocks in American history. And beech and birch, those are also very, very popular. They're heavy, but they're stable. They have the advantage of being sometimes more readily available in certain areas, so they can be less expensive. But walnut is by and large the favored wood for gun stocks, and it always has been throughout the world when it comes to wooden stocks. What about the claim that they make shots wander from one shot to another? Well, first of all, it was not the wood that was always at fault. It was typically the mounting, the way the stock was mounted to the gun itself, to the barreled action. And I spoke about this in an earlier video, a couple of earlier videos about, the proper method to mount a gun stock. And in the industry, whether it's wood or synthetic stocks, the preferred method in the industry is to solidly bed the receiver typically, with some sort of a, cross buck system, where each end of the receiver is bedded in a 2-point system, or whether it's epoxy, or just simply solidly to the wood. But solidly bedded receiver, absolutely no movement, and what's become overwhelmingly a standard practice in the industry is to free float the forend. Now, when this banter about, gunstock instability first started to come about back 40 or 50 years ago, the standard method of mounting a stock was not at all free-floated and solidly bedded receivers. It was to have a very loosely bedded receiver, one that had broad tolerance, simply because it was easier and cheaper to manufacture that way, and to solidly bed a pillow. There was a raised portion of wood, and if you look at any of the older wood stocks in the industry, you'll see that there is a raised pillow, generally about 2 inches back from the forend, and it's about 3/4 to an inch long, and that was designed to cause pressure against the barrel. And that pressure, together with the downward pressure, the opposing pressure of the two or three receiver screws, would create a solid mass so that the stock and the barreled action became one. And as I've said before, for that type of mounting, it did very, very well for many decades. It allowed a gun to be relatively stable without causing too much disruption from one season to another. In those days, expectations for small groups were such that if a gun was firing 2.5-inch groups at 100 yards with factory ammunition, that was considered to be very delightful. That was considered to be an extraordinarily accurate gun. So it did well for that class of accuracy. And very frequently, as with the Model 70 Winchesters, the pre-64 Model 70 Winchesters, they had a screw right here in the forend, and that was screwed into a raised section of barrel. You can see it's got the hump back on those barrels, and it was threaded right into the barrel. So not only was the receiver solidly bedded, and as I say, with a considerable degree of tolerance, but it was screwed down tightly, and the forend was screwed down tightly, so it became one unit. The concept of free floating did not come about for many, many years, and it was probably practiced privately by people such as me and a lot of people who were interested in fine accuracy. It was something that was a conversion job done by us to glass bed into free float, but that corrected that instability issue. The instability had nothing to do whatsoever with the wood. It had to do with the fact that as barrel metal heated up and began to expand due to heat, tensions on those mounting provisions became different, and that caused movement on the target. That was nothing to do. It had nothing to do whatsoever with the wood, and wood unfortunately got blamed for what had nothing to do with the wood. It had to do with the mounting provisions, how one stock was mounted to the receiver and to the barrel. So, but that claim persisted, and gun writers to this day keep parroting that same thing over and over and over again. I want to show you, for instance, now here's a target that I saved from October 13th of 2017, in the fall of 2017, with this 257 Roberts that I just showed you, with 115 grain Berger VLD bullets and H48 31 powder and standard WLR Winchester Large rifle primers, 10 shots into .769 center to Now you take a look at that, and this is rapid fire. This was not sitting there, taking my time and shooting, one shot every half a minute or a minute. I fired all these shots off in less than, basically as fast as I could shoot them, and reload the magazine and continue to fire them. All these shots were fired in basically less than a minute and a half. That barrel got plenty hot, very hot, and it's a wooden stock. It didn't climb. It didn't begin to wander around the paper. It stayed a nice small group. Remember, that's basically a 3/4 MOA fired rapid fire. Many of those shots go into the same exact. They're tripled up and quadrupled up into the same holes. So, no, they don't tend. That also puts a lie to something else I spoke about one other time, which is the, probably gun myth number 2, which is that narrow, thin barrels can't shoot. Think about what we're dealing with when we're talking about wood. The militaries throughout the world, until synthetics became available, basically that was a post-World War II invention, where plastics became more technological. Up until then, we had things such as Bakelite and a couple of polystyrenes, but there were very, very few. Very few dense plastics that could be used for such applications as gunstocks until well into the 50s and 60s, and they were, at that time, they were still quite limited in terms of availability. But until that time, and even beyond, wooden stocks were the rule of the day. Now, sights were regulated one time. They were regulated one time to have that peep zeroed and centered. Usually, it was done right at the armory, and throughout the gun's life, the rifleman could expect that when he returned his peep sight to the center, that it was always going to shoot in the same place. Not necessarily very accurately. These guns had an expected accuracy of about 4 MOA, but the center of that 4 MOA didn't move from left to right and up and down. It stayed where it was. It never changed. So, and these were massive, heavy wooden stocks. They were quite stable. Walnut is very stable wood. The one thing that any gun stock maker always did was he carefully selected wood where the grain ran true down the center of the forend, especially, and throughout the receiver section, and it should have stability in the grip section so that the gun stock wouldn't break off in this weaker, thinner area. So, they had to carefully lay out gun stocks basically coming off the tree, had to make sure that as they sawed that lumber up, they sawed it up so that they didn't waste wood, and so that the stocks would be laid out in conformance with the grain. And usually when they had grain that didn't cooperate, it became 2 smaller stocks. So they could easily find a smaller piece for a buttstock for a shotgun, or for a lever action rifle or something like this, or a smaller, shorter section for a forearm. In any case, this gun here now is 70 years old last year. And this gun here was carried throughout New England. I guarantee you this was a heavily hunted 32 Winchester Special. And I'm sure it hunted all throughout New Hampshire, Maine, and probably Vermont throughout its history, throughout its life. And it's still just as handsome as the day that it was put on the gun. It's got some distressing from banging around in the woods all those years, and for probably just sitting in a gun cabinet getting knocked into, and it's got some thinning on the bluing and stuff, but this was a heavily used gun. And this stock is still just as magnificent in terms of its density and stability as it was the day it was made 71 years ago. So I don't have any complaints about synthetic stocks, none whatsoever. I just simply don't buy them. And the reason I don't buy them is because I like to look at a stock and I like to feel a stock as much as I like to shoot the rifle. And plastic is plastic. Black plastic is black plastic. My camera I'm looking at is black plastic. You know, it's nothing you can hug. It's nothing that you can, you know, you can't drool over it. It's just what it is. It's black plastic. There's black plastic on the cowl of my engine. Who cares? I mean, so to have a stock on a gun, which is something that's a prize possession, to have something made with the same material that's the cowling on the engine of my car, I don't think so. So I just love it. I mean, I love wood. Synthetic stocks are very practical for certain applications, you know, for a military that needs to purchase and procure, you know, literally millions of rifles, and to be sure that they all have exactly the same standard of performance without having to worry about, you know, paying to have wooden stocks made. To have a wooden stock made is a painstaking process. I mean, it starts from the very time the tree is cut down. Everything is selected from that point on until it becomes a stock, and it has to be replicated on a lathe. Usually there's a whole gang of them that are mounted on replication lathes. I've seen the process at Ruger, and at Remington, where each of the stock blanks are mounted on basically ganged spindles, and there's one master stock that's made of perhaps steel, and as that's turning, there are fingers that are copying it, and it's basically every one of those stocks is being routed out and turned to the same dimension. So they can only be done, you know, about 8 or 10 at a time, or whatever the replicator is able to do. And then they have to be finely finished. They have to have additional inletting done on special inletting machinery, which is designed for that process. And finally, they have to be sanded and finished, and some sort of protective application applied, which in the case of military stocks is usually simple boiled linseed oil that soaks into the wood. It doesn't provide special glossiness or anything like that, although it can. And then you have newer finishes, which are various types of synthetic urethanes to protect them. They're very, very effective. You know, I can sit this thing under a shower for 3 hours. It's not going to change. I mean, this has got exterior grade, basically what you would call varnish put on it, and that's exactly what was used throughout the industry until synthetic varnishes, basically urethanes, are basically plastics. So until those things were developed, they used spar varnish, which was a varnish which was designed and formulated for use aboard ships at sea. That's why it's called spar varnish, because it was used on the spars of ships, you know, the masts. So it was always very, very well protected, and nobody had any complaints about it rotting or, you know, disintegrating or anything like that. Its greatest threat was, as I've said many times, its greatest threat was somebody who liked to, you know, fell in love with an oil can and kept on using oil in his gun, and then the wood stock soaked it up and it became punky. So I talked about that in another video. But please don't believe the nonsense that you see about wooden stocks being unstable. If you like wood, if you're like me and you like how wood just looks warm and it's pretty, they're all different. You can get magnificent grain. Do not be afraid to buy a wood-stocked gun thinking that it's going to somehow be less accurate than a synthetic stocked gun. That's a total bogus lie. Don't fall into that, again, that cliche. So, Murphy, I weighed him yesterday. We had him for 4 weeks, and in those 4 weeks he's grown from 6 pounds to 15 pounds. Right now he's upstairs he's up in his box and he's sleeping. He loves going into his crate, and all we have to do is say, Murphy, you want to go in your crate? He goes flying, runs into it, and we just shut the door and he takes a nap for 2 or 3 hours. He's growing. They're like little kids. They just want to sleep all the time because they're growing so fast. He probably has growing pains. But anyway, I expect pretty soon his deciduous teeth, his baby teeth, are going to start falling out pretty soon because it's around that time. He's just around 12 weeks old. So he's doing great. Thank you, Patreon donors, for your kind assistance. You're really helping me out with so much. So, most importantly, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe right now. If you like my channel, pass it on to other people. God bless.